Okay, we are ready. I just want to make sure that you could see the Gemara on the screen. Can you see the Gemara on the screen? Akiva, can you see the Gemara? Hope I look at me. Okay, so we'll get started. So we are really at the top of Daf Pei Beis Amud Aleph. But in order to get an understanding of the Gemara, I want to go back and just review how we got to where we're holding. We had halacha in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yosy said that an androgynous that got married to a woman will be able to be Michael her betruma. And we had a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish said only truma d'Rabbanan bisman hazeh, because really an androgynous is not a vati zach. Really, Rabbi Yosy holds that an androgynous is a suffix zach. But since it's only truma midrabanan, we'll let her eat the truma midrabanan, even though her husband is only a suffix zach. Rabbi Yochanan said no. It's a vaday zacher, and even bisman beis hamikdash, an androgynous can be machal his wife truma, and even chazal b'shoik, even kosher. Rish Lakish said, how do I know that truma bisman hazeh midrabanan? Because we had the halacha of igul bein hoigulim. If you had a big wheel of pressed figs, which is an item that could be sold in bulk, but it could also be sold individually wrapped. The halacha is if one eagle of truma got mixed into a whole bunch of igulim of chulin, so if one eagle of truma got mixed into a whole bunch of igulim of chulin, Rabbi Rish Lakish learns a brisa that says it's mutter, and the problem is if it's a dover choshev, how could it be mutter? It must be because it's only midrabanan, and therefore we're mekel. And even though it's a dover choshev, it'll be mutter. But what's interesting about the eagle is it's not a dover choshev that it's only ever sold individually. It's something that could sometimes be sold by the pound as well. Zok Rabbi Yochanan, I hold that that's not something that's not bottled. That would be bottled even by deraisa. So even if it was truma deraisa, even if your truma says deraisa, it would still be bottled eagle beigulim, because an eagle isn't something that's so chosh, because it's not exclusively sold individual. It's possible that it's sold individual. That's not exclusive enough. The only type of things that are not bottled are things that exclusively are sold individual. And Rabbi Yochanan said, I hold of a brisa that talks about chatichos, which indicates that even a dover choshev is going to be bottled b'roiv, even if sometimes you sell them individually, which took us to a brisa that was halfway down on Daf Pei Aleph Amud Beis. And we're going to be focusing on how Rish Lakish explains this brisa. So let's go back to the brisa on Daf Pei Aleph Amud Beis, the last word on the line, smack in the center of the Daf, the Tanya. It says, Chaticha shel chatos tmeya. You had a piece of a carbon chatos, meat, and it was tamei. For shteisach, that's not allowed to be eaten. But shenis arba b'meya chatichos shel chatohos taharos. It got mixed in with 100 pieces of chatohos taharos. Or another example of such a case is v'chem prusa shel lechem aponim tmeya. A piece of lechem aponim that was tamei. Shenis arba b'meya prusa shel lechem aponim taharos. So the Tanakama says ta'ala. Ta'ala means it's going to be bottled b'roif. You'll be oil 100 connected one. It's bottled in 100, and therefore it's going to be mutter. We'll treat them all as if they're tall. So Rabbi Yochanan is bringing a raya from this that even though it's a chaticha, it's something that's sold sometimes individually, but it could also be sold by the pound. You see, it's still bottled b'roif, not like what Rish Lakish sold. Rabbi Yehuda in this brayta says, "Loy tala, it's not batal b'roiv." And Rashi already told us that the reason why it's not batal b'roiv is because min b'minay loy batal. So just to stop for a moment and understand what min b'minay loy batal means. Min b'minay loy batal. If I have one cherry mixed into other cherries, it won't be batal. But if I had one cherry mixed into some other thing, then it will be batal. What is the svar of min b'minay loy batal? And what is this machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim? So the way they're running in the Durham, there's a beautiful run in the Durham Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph that explains this very beautiful. And the Ran says in the Durham as follows: the Ran says that min b'mino is not batal because the way bittul works is if you have something that's overwhelmed by something else, so it's machlish that it takes it away. Masha'inkin, if you have min b'mino, two things that are exactly the same, not only isn't it machlish it's machazik it. Listen, this is too geschmack to do this by heart. I'm going to chap now a Gemara in the Durham, and I'm going to read it inside in the Ram. It's a geschmack around. The geschmack around. Let me grab the Ram, the Durham. I thought I would be able to do justice by just speaking it out, but I don't think I'll be able to do that. So let me chap the Ram. It's stuff Nun Beis Amud Aleph. You guys, I can't bring it up on the screen. Actually, technically, I could bring it up on the screen, but it's simpler this way. Nun Beis Amud Aleph. The Ran says as follows. It's a long Ran, but I'm going to start in the middle of the Ran. And it says as follows. Zok the Heilige Ran. V'chach nirali b'taimei shaldoch. This is what I believe is the svara of min b'minay lebach. The chazina l'Rabbanan u'Rabbi Yehuda. We know there's a machlokes Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda, which is exactly what we're discussing. I have actually a big gemuda, not even that old chas, a regular gemuda there. Sure. Give me one second. Let me get it. I have a mishmaka one, a big one that's a good print. One of these is the Dharma. This is the Dharma. I think the one that's all the way to the right, the black one, in the Nation of the Dharma. My Nation of the Dharma. Okay, moving back to the Dharma. So right in the beginning, right smack in the middle of the Amud, it says, "The chach nirali b'taimei shaldoch." The chazina we saw l'Rabbanan u'Rabbi Yehuda, our Rabbanan and our Rabbi Yehuda right here. The ifluga b'min b'minai. They're arguing whether min b'minai ibatul loy. You have one piece of meat mixed into other pieces of meat. That's min b'minai. V'arminu per hakoymitz rabba. In hakoymitz in Menachos it says the shneim mikra echad. What is the mikar? Where do we know that min b'minai is not batal? So we know on Yom Kippur they shechted a par and they spritzed its blood on the oren inside the kodesh of kodeshim. Then the Kohen Gadol spritzed it on the pareches in the kodesh, and then he spritzed it on the mizbech hapnimi. He did the same with the blood of the seir, and then he mixed the blood together, and then he spritzed on both of the bloods mixed together. But when the pasuk describes that, the pasuk says v'lokach midam apar u'midam seir. Here they're mixed together, yet the Torah still says that they're distinct. Even though there's so much more blood from the par than the blood of the seir, so you would think the blood of seir would be totally overwhelmed and would be bottled. The Torah calls it korele dam seir. So you see from the Torah almalei bottle because it's dam in b'minay bottle. So how do we understand this halacha of min b'minay bottle that the Torah is telling us? Because of Rabbi Yehuda holds the Hanu Taima Mishum, and this is the focus of the Ran. Hanu Taima the Min B'Minay Bottle Lefi Shekol Dovar Shehu Doima Lechavei. Right, anything that's similar to its friend. In this case, we're talking about the Dam Apar and the Dam Asir. Einay Machlishay Mabatla. The Dam Apar will not be Machlishay be Mabatl the Dam of the Seir. Rather, to the contrary, it's actually going to make it even stronger. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda holds all Isurim all over the Torah. If it's min b'minai, lo batal. How do the Rabbanon explain? The Rabbanon can't deny min b'minai because it's before from the Torah. So how do the Rabbanon understand it? For Rabbanon the Rabbanon don't understand it like Rabbi Yehuda. The Mikol Makom min b'minai the Isser v'Heter ain't diamonds eloseh. Who said that what he finds, things that are similar, are only its physical properties? How about its halachic properties? Isser v'Heter are also min b'she'enai minoi. That's the chiddush of the Rabbanan. The kibbutz the chad osir v'chad shari. If one is mutter, one's osir. She'ein roy leilach achar dimyoina be'etzem. Who said you only look at their physical properties, that they're similar? Ela achar chilukon be'isser v'Heter. Rather, you look at their chiluk in isser v'Heter. And therefore, if one's mutter and one's osir, even if it's min b'minoi, zogen the Rabbanan, that it will be batal. And that's our case, where you had the chaticha tameya with the chaticha asura. It's min b'sheina minoi. They're both meat, but one's tamei, one's tar. Elahainu taima, the dama par ain't mevatel dama seir. Why is the dama par not mevatel dama seir? Because it's similar in two ways. It's similar physically, and it's also similar halachically. Mishum the kivon the shnei and oilin, kloimar sheksher l'zrika. Since both of these domim, side of dama par and side of dama seir, have the same halachic status. They're kosher for zrika. Therefore, ein mevatlin zeh. They won't be mevatel them.
Mishnah for zrika in the same places also. It's the highest.
That's right. It's going to be expressed in the same place. That's right. The same way Rabbi Yehuda focuses only on the physical properties that are the same to assess min b'minoi. The Rabbanan also look at its halachic status. Any two items that one is mutter and one's osir, even if they're exactly the same thing, like the cases of meat in our case, bottle it will be bottle. Because it's a min shein b'minoi. And now the Ran goes like a shmaka bomba de chiddush that's based on what we just said. We have a rule, dover sheyesh matirin, something that's going to be mutter anyway, is not bottle b'roiv. And I'm going to give you an example. Someone made a neder that he won't eat this piece of meat. And this piece of meat got mixed in with other pieces of meat. So the halacha is you won't say that it's bottle. You know why? Because it's a davar sheyesh matirin. He can go be shoyel on the neder, and then it'll all be mutter. So therefore, davar sheyesh matirin is not bottle. Why? Zog in the Ran geshmak b'shmak. That's why we say the bedavar sheyesh matirin not to Rabbanon mishum chomol Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanon are more, even though Rabbi Yehuda holds min b'minoi is never bottle. The Rabbanon agree by a davar sheyesh matirin that min b'minoi is ain't bottle either. You know why? The kivon she'ein davar zeh chalak min heter lagamri. Be'isr heter. If something's utter 100%, something's mutter 100%, that's not min b'minoi. This is utter. This is mutter. But if something is utter, but it's going to become mutter, it's not so different than something that's mutter. Even this thing that's author is going to become mutter. So therefore, Amrino and Shein Nevatel Bmino. The Hachi have a dama tuva chada shem shavim b'min v'oid she'enon chalukan l'gamer b'itzav heter. It's either the same species and they're not so different from one another when you look at its halachic status. One is mutter and one can become mutter. So the svara of davar sheish l'matirin is not bottled by min b'minoi is precisely because there's no difference in halachic status. It's makaran. So that Mamish explains our Gemara really, really beautifully. I'm already excited to learn the Torah because the Ran is like a combination of Rashi and Tosfos light. So it makes the whole Masechta more. Yeah, and it reads beautifully. I mean, it's the first version of Art Scroll, the Ran and the Dudum. Okay, so let's see the Gemara Vayter. So the Gemara says as follows. So we were smack in the middle of this price. So the first part of the brisa was that you had these two meats that were mixed in, chatas tameya and chatas tahira. The Tanakama says tala, and Rabbi Yehuda said loy sala because he holds min b'minoi loy bottle. Avol chaticha shel chatas tahira shenis arva b'mei chaticha shel chulin tahiris. What if everything is tahir? The question is, now my chulin is mixed with my kachim, so because of that, I'm going to suffer a small loss because I'm going to have to treat everything like kachim. And everybody knows anyone would be willing to pay more money to buy chulin than they would be willing to pay to buy kachim because chulin has no restrictions. That's why Kohen and Levi, those aliyahs sell for much cheaper than Yisrael because they're restricted. So if you have such a case, then Divra Kol Lo Sala. Everybody agrees Lo Sala. Rashi tells us at this point in the Gemara, which is Pe'ala from a base, we're going to have many different pshatim for this. But right now, the reason why it's Lo Sala is because there's no great loss here. If worse comes to worse, and we're not going to say that it's bottle, what's going to happen? You're going to have to sell it to a coin for a slightly discounted price. No, for that, we're not going to rely on the heter of it. Katani miyas. For the Gemara, this is going to be very schwer on Rish Lakish. Because if you remember, Rish Lakish said that when you have a chaticha, which is something that is sometimes sold individually, it will not be bottled. Katani miyas reisha tala. But our Tanakama says, even though it's a piece, it's bottled. That's connected to what Rish Lakish said. Rabbi Yochanan said that only things that are only counted will not be bottled. But something that could sometimes be counted and sometimes weighed, that would be bottled. That's perfect for us to understand the Tanakama. But Rish Lakish says, if even sometimes you count it, that's not bottled. Meat fits into that category. So what's Pshat in the Tanakama who says, Tala? We're not speaking about pieces. We're not the chaticha that the Tanakama mentions. It's a doichet. It says chaticha shochat esmeya, meaning the piece that you put into a pot and it ended up getting mushed. And now it's all mushed, so there's no more chaticha or l'schavid. There's no more davar chashiv.
So
That's what bottle b'roy.
That only the isse, the tumayu, that's a micho, or
Everything was micha.
That's an al.
Yeah, because if only tumayu is micha, weiß nicht, what this is.
Nein, aber ich bekomme gerade,
Just pieces of mushed meat, like a chum, right? So you can't tell anymore what's left. Correct the Gemara. If that's the case, Yachi my time with Rabbi Yehuda. So why would Rabbi Yehuda say loy salah? It's totally indiscernible. It's not a chaticha or a schab. It's not a chaticha. That's right. So why does Rabbi Kiva say? Why does Rabbi Yehuda say loy salah?
Das ist sicher nicht verkauft für dich allein, right?
Say that again.
Nicht nur so ein schlechtig it's not.
It's a mush, right? It can only be told by a fact.
Yeah,
that's right. So after Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Tamei, like Rashi already told us in Amar Aleph. So we're at the top of Pebeis Amar Aleph now. Rabbi Yehuda Tamei, Bmino le bottle. You know why it's not bottle? Because it's min Bmino. So that's right now. We're in an interim stage. How Rish Lakish understands the brisa. The first case of the brisa, which is a doichik, it says chatichos, it means it was dissolved. And the reason why Rabbi Yehuda argues is because he owes min b'min levato. And then you have the second half of the Mishnah that's speaking about nemuach pieces. We don't know yet what the case of the kachim that got mixed in with the chulin. So let's see what the Gemara says. The way Rish Lakish is understanding it now, if those pieces didn't get dissolved, what would be the halacha? Lo yisala. According to Rish Lakish, it would not be bottled. So Abazai, why did we need to find a case in the Sefer with a special reason for a chumrah? Because there's not such a great loss. Adatani avol chaticha shel chatas tahira shenitarva b'meya chaticha shel chulun tahiras lo yisala. The Gemara had to find a distant case that has a new factor mixed in, the factor that it's not a great loss, and therefore it's not bottled. We have a much closer case where it wouldn't be bottled. Let's pick a case where it's tama and tar, where it's a total loss. And we could say as follows. Where does the Tanakama hold that it's bottled? That's only if it was dissolved. But if the pieces are ba'en, then loy salah. And that would be a better thing. It's closer to what we're talking about. If the whole chiddush to the ratio is by the mucha, the bottle, well then the alternate case should be loy mucha, and it's not bottle. Why did it jump to a case of tahiris b'tahiris? Dr. Gemara, you're right. Be'etim, that's the way it should be. But this time it happens to want to specially tell us the chiddush of tahiris b'tahiris. Tahiris b'tahiris audibly. The Tana has a special interest b'dafka in telling us the chiddush of tahiris b'tahiris, because that's a special chiddush. Because I would have thought that would be bottle. Why would I have thought that would be bottle? So for that, we'll go into Rashi on the third line. Tahiris b'tahir adifalei Lashmina, the Tana would rather tell us that Chiddush. The Afagav the Shtein Tahiros, the Shaykh Behu Bitula Tzvei, even though both are tar, and it's more mistaber to say that it should be bottled. Where do you find that if they're both tar, it's more mistaber that it should be bottled? I have a Gemara of Rashi. The Ashkam Masechas Trumais, the Truma Tahir Bechulum Tahirin, Hakal Moedin Shoyim. Everybody's moedin that Truma Tahir with Chulum Tahir is bottled. Truma Tameya B'Tahir Chalukim V'Shama Vasil. So you see that it's much more mistaber to say that Tahir B'Tahir would be bottled. So the Tana wanted to speak at B'Davka in this case. In this case, Tahir B'Tahir would not be bottled because it's not such a great loss.
And do that when Truma Drabun?
No, we're talking about Kachim. This Bryce we're talking about
But
Kachim.
that Truma Tahir, Bechilum Tahir, the Rashi.
Oh, Raji is speaking about Truma.
Truma Drabunan, Truma Derash.
No, Truma Deraisa. It's all Deraisa. So Zok to Gemara, Ula Rish Lakish. So we're still hammering on Rish Lakish on how he's understanding this Bryce. So right now Rish Lakish understands the Bryce that the Reisha is by Nimucha and the Seifa is not by Nimucha, but it's also by Tahir B'Tahir. So for the Gemara, Rish Lakish, Maishna Reisha, Umaishna Seifa. Oh, so for Keret, the way we're learning now is the Seifa is also speak by Nimuch. The Reisha is by Nimuch, the Seifa is by Nimuch, but by Nimuach we're going to be machmer if it's not a great loss. So Zok Rashi very beautiful. What is the kasher? There's a very big difference. One, there's a big loss, and one there's not a big loss, right? So Zok Rashi beautifully. I'll tell you why. So I'm now on the Rashi 5 lines down in the skinny lines. Bishlam the way Rabbi Yochanan is learning this brisa with a pashtus that's speaking about pieces. The Mukila Bishlema, we're speaking about big pieces. So there's a good reason to be machalik between the Reisha and the Seifa, because we know that being mevatel pieces is a little bit of a kula. So you could say Seifa, even the Hefset Muatu, since in the Seifa it's no great loss if it's not bottle. Loy mivatlin and chaticha shlema. There, we're not going to rely on the kula to be mevatel a whole piece. Since sometimes you count it. So, yeah, we'll be making if push comes to shove. If we're going to lose all of the kachim, you have tamei b'tahiris. But if it's merely a question of chulin and kachim mixed together, then we're not going to be makel because you have another way out. Even though according to Rabbi Yochanan, an eagle b'truma is bottle in chulin, because he holds it's a real bittul. How do we know he's become hadil Rish Lakish? On Amid Beis, he told Rish Lakish, I'm sorry, on Amid Aleph, on Pei Aleph Amid Aleph, he told Rish Lakish, I learned that avada chaticha bechaticha is bottle no matter what. Mechalal demoide beigel the bottle. Nevertheless, even though Rabbi Yochanan knows meikar adin, this dover choshev is bottle, there's still an argument to say it's a shtickle of kula, and he might not offer that kula if it's not a great loss. You have to give it all to the coin. You treat it all like kachim. Since it's all the raisa, kachim is the raisa. We won't be worried about a small hefted we won't say bittul. Elul Rish Lakish, but according to Rish Lakish, who's learning over here, the Amar Midi Dairaisa loy bottle, he holds that a big piece is not bottle at all. And the only reason why it's bottle here in the Reisha of our Mishnah is it's speaking Bachamishum de Nimuach. So come to Chois, loy choshev su isadila. Since it's Nimuach, it's not choshev anymore. Ubottle, and that's why it's bottle. That's how we learn the Reisha. So I bazoi seifa, amalei sala, halech l'surbeine. I understand when there's a special kula here of a big thing being bottle, there I would hear, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it'd be a reason why it should be also in the seifa. But if it's totally mushed, it's regular bittul. There's regular bittul. There's no reason to be machmer. There's a standard bittul of kolatar gula. We're not going to wait. We're not going to say there's no bittul of others a bittul. The reason why we would be machmer is if it's not a typical bittul, because it's the bittul of a davar choshev. But if you learn the bride like Rish Lakish, that it's all nimuach, there's no reason to be machmer just because it's hefsed muvit. Bittul works, even though I have to move. So we're now stuck again in understanding Rish Lakish's approach. Rish Lakish ma'ishnareish ma'ishnaseif. So because of that, Rav Shisha changes pshat, which makes it even less kishmak to the pashtus shot of the brisa. We first started with chunks, which is the maximum of the pashtus of the brisa. We changed it to the muach. Doesn't say the muach, so that was a doichik. Now it's going to get even more doch. And we're going to soon see that the Mishnah also is not mashal like Rish Lakish. So Rish Lakish Shita is not going to be so geshmak in the brisa, nor will it be geshmak in the Mishnah. But Amar B'Shisha B'Rei Ravidi, Reisha B'Tumas Mashkin Derabana. The Reisha is speaking by Derabana. The Reisha is speaking by Derabana. It's always speaking by Nimuch. It's also by Nimuch, but it's Tumas Mashkin Derabana. So what is exactly the case? We're talking about a chaticha of meat that was tamei, that mixed in with pieces of meat that were tar. How did this piece of meat become tamei? It didn't touch the sheretz. Then it would be tamei midaraisa. What happened was it was in a dish. That dish was tamei tumas rishon midarabana. How did that dish become tamei tumas rishon midarabana? It touched a mashke. The loch is a mashke, even if it's a shlishi l'tuma, it automatically goes and becomes an av. The Rabbanan treated any mashke that's tamei like an av because of mashke ma'yotzim min azov. So anytime a mashke becomes tamei, midarabanan, they make it into an av. So this mashke, which was midarabanan and av, touched the keli. Midaraisa, the keli is 100% tar. Midarabanan, the keli becomes a rishon, and it'll make midarabanan, the meat, into a sheni. And that's the meat that we're talking about. So Zok the Gemara, the Reish is speaking by tumah that's only tumah midarabanan. That's why it's going to be bottle. It's going to be bottle in the rest of the mushed up tar meat. However, the Seifa, Zok the Gemara, Seifa is Dairaisa. The Seifa is speaking where it's Tamei Midaraisa. It's Tamei Midaraisa. Because what is the Seifa? The Seifa is speaking about kachim that got mixed in with chulin. That's for sure Dairaisa. Because a Yisrael Midaraisa cannot eat kachim. So the Reish is speaking where you had kachim that was Tamei Midarabanan mixed into kachim that was tar. There, the whole thing is Darabanan. There we're makel. But when you have a shayla of the rice, we're going to let a zar eat kachim. That's where we're going to be machmer. So the Omer Abshish B'Rei Davidi, Reisha b'Tumas Mashkin Darabanan, Seifa Dairaisa. Rashi says, very important, kachim, I'm looking at the Seifa in Rashi, kachim l'zar is in this Dairaisu, u'midi Dairaisa min b'minoi, l'haitan esvir l'd'leibotel. We could ask the same question we asked a minute ago. If it's bottle, it's bottle. What's the difference if it's the rice or the bottle? The Torah is Dr. Rashi, because here it's min b'minoi. And the Gemara is saying a huge chiddush that according to Rish Lakish, min b'minoi will not be bottle by Nishud rice. Min b'minoi will only be bottle by Ishmael Rabbanan. So we just changed all the parameters. Until now we said that the Rabbanan hold min b'minoi is bottle if it's Isra and Heter. Now we're saying no, min b'minoi is not bottle by Yisra and Heter. Min b'minoi is only bottled by the Rabbanan, not by Deraisa. So as you can see, we're really twisting ourselves into a pretzel to understand how Rish Lakish is learning pshat in this brisa. Zok Gemara, you're still not out of the woods. Even with this doichik teretz, we still have a problem. Because Freik the Gemara, Aval b'tuma sheretz, loy, I'm sorry, I believe I skipped a little bit. Freik the Gemara, Aval tuma sheretz mai. So what would have been if in the Reish of our Mishnah, instead of it being Tamei Tumah D'Rabbanan, it's speaking about a sheretz to touch the meat. So now the meat is Osam D'Raisa. Loy Sala. You're going to say, since it's a D'Raisa, min b'minei le'batel. If that's the case, we have the same question we asked earlier. Adatani seifa abal chaticha shel chatos tahira. Shenizar b'mei chaticha shel chulud tahiros loy Sala. The Brisa had to look for a case where there was a hefsed mu'at to find a case where we would not be materit with bittul. We could have had a much simpler case. Niflag v'lis nebedida. When do we say that the mush mixed together is bottled, even though it's min b'minai b'tumas mashkin, where it was only a tumah d'Rabbanan? Aval b'tumas sheretz, if in this same case, the way the meat became tamei was by touching a sheretz, loy, it would be aser. Why do you have to go find the case where it's kachim mixed into chun? Dr. Gemara, the same tears we said before. You're right, tumah sheretz would be a better comparison. But tahira b'tahira is other play. Tahira b'tahira is a huge chiddush, because normally a tahira is much easier to be mevatel than tahiras. Yet the Tana wants to tell us that in this case it wouldn't be that way. So that's why it picks this case.
Double text.
Exactly. So now we have one pshat. It's a little bit dochuk. So even though it says in the Brisa that chaticha got mixed into chaticha, shlokish means it got mixed, it was all mushed together. And the reason why it's tala according to the Tanakama is because since it's only an Issa D'Rabbanan, because we're talking about a Tumah D'Rabbanan, therefore we'll say min b'mino is bottle. But in the case of a Daraisa, such as chulin mixed with kachim, and a Yisrael who eats kachim is a Chiyav Daraisa, there we'll say min b'mino le bottle. That's how Rish Lakish is learning the Brisa, Dochav, but that's the pshat. Zog to Gemara, we have another pshat. Rabba Omar, Reisha Isser Lab, Sefer Isser Koros. Maybe we could say that the difference is they're both Deraisa, but the Reisha is an Isser Lab, because the Reisha is a discussion of the Kachim becoming Tameh. If one eats Kachim when the Kachim is Tameh, you yourself are Tar, but the Kachim are Tameh, that's only an Isser Lab. But if someone eats kachim when they're tummy, that'll be an Isser Koros. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at the Seifa. The Seifa was a case where kachim that was tar got mixed with chulin that was tar. Who's talking about someone tummy eating it? So Rashi, since we're talking about something that's kachim that's tar, if someone is tummy and eats it, he'll be chayav Koros. So that's called Isser Koros. So in the ratio where it's only an Isser Lav, there will be mekel, and we'll say min b'mini bot. But with the Seifa where it's potentially an Isser Koros, we'll say min b'mini le bot. Frank the Gemara, you cannot say that pshat, because v'harabahu the Amar, Rabba himself said, kol b'deraisa loishna Isser Lav loishna Isser Koros. If something's asur b'deraisa, you're not mekel. You're not going to be mekel more because it's only an asur lav, not the Koros. If it's asur deraisa, all these surim deraisa, no matter what the einish is, have the same severity. So Zoktamar Kasha, no, we have a Kasha on Rabba's Pshat. So that's our second shot. The first Pshat is the first is Derabon, the second is Deraisa. The second Pshat was the first is Deraisa Lav, the second is Deraisa Koros. And the third Pshat is Rabbi Yomer, Seifa Mishum Dahava Lei, Dover Sheyesh Material. You know why in the Seifa it's not bottle? It's because it's a Dover Sheyesh Material. The Chal Dover Sheyesh Material, Afilu Belaf Le bottle. We know a Dover Sheyesh Material is not bottle. Zok to Gemara V'Adar Rashi Bedusi. This there is Rashi is saying is a falsehood, right? That's what you told me earlier. It's a falsehood. Why? Because it doesn't make sense. The Dover Sheyesh Material means now it's utter, it's going to become mutter. There is no, that's not the thing. If we're talking about the coin, Mishra Shori, it's not a Dover Sheyesh Material, it's in Gant and Mutter. A coin's allowed in Kachim. Il Yisrael, and if we're talking about Yisrael, Loy L'Masr, it'll never become mutter for the Yisrael. It will permanently remain osur to the Yisrael. So therefore, Elahad Rabashi Bedusi. So because of that, we only have two terutzim. We have the first eretz that the Reish is speaking the Rabbana, and the Sefer is speaking the Raisa, and we have the second eretz, which will share a little bit, is that the first one is speaking about an Isser Lav, the second one is speaking about a potential Isser Koros. Beautiful. Zok to Gemara. Now we're going to go analyze Rabbi Yochanan. On Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, we said that Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Rish Lakish, who says that Truma B'zman Zez Derabanan. Rabbi Yochanan knows Truma B'zman Zez Deraisa. Frank Gemara, is that so? Does Rabbi Yochanan hold that Truma B'zman Zez Deraisa? But Tanya, I'm going to prove to you that there has to be at least a case of Truma Derabanan, which would have to mean B'zman Zez. Because what happened was Shtei Kupoi, some of the two big boxes that were full of grain. Achas shal chulin, one box was full of grain of chulin. The achas shal truma, and one was filled with truma. V'lefneim, and in front of these two huge boxes, shtei soyin, were two saw. Achas shal chulin, v'achas shal truma. V'notlu elu b'sarcheli. A saw of the chulin fell into one big vat, and a saw of the truma fell into the other big vat. We don't know which fell into which. So it's possible that the chulin box was contaminated, so to speak, with the truma. Nevertheless, hare'elu mutar. We say that the chulin remains mutar, the one that we know is chulin. Why? Shani Aimer, truma l'sech truma nafla, v'chulin l'sech chulin naf. We would say the truma fell into the truma, the chulin fell into the chulin. Now, at this point in the Gemara doesn't believe in any magical formula. we magically say that the chulun fell into the chulun, truma fell into the truma. Mehechatesa. It must be working with some type of bittul b'roiv. For Amar Rish Lakish, and Rish Lakish explained this brisa, for who sharabu chulun al truma. It's speaking where even if the saw of truma fell into the chulun, there was so much chulun in that container that it would have been mevatlet 100 to 1 anyway. So therefore, we're not really saying a magical formula that the chulun fell into the chulun, the truma fell into the truma. No, we're saying it's bottle anyway, so it doesn't matter. That would be Rish Lakish. But Rabbi Yochanan, he said, Av api shalei rabbi chulun al truma. Even if there was no more chulun than truma, how could that possibly be mutter then? How could it be mutter? You can't say magic that the chulun fell to the chulun, the truma fell to the truma. The teretz is what must have happened is you must say that it's Rabbanan. And since it's a Rabbanan, and it's a Suffolk Rabbanan, the Suffolk if the truma fell in, Suffolk Rabbanan l'chula. But that means Rabbi Yochanan has to hold that truma b'zman says Rabbanan. Yet we learned on Pei Aleph and Aleph that Rabbi Yochanan is saying that truma b'zman says Daraisa. That is our problem. B'shlomo Rish Lakish kasaver b'Rabbanan nami rebuya hudibina. According to Rish Lakish, even though this is truma Rabbanan, he doesn't know that this magical thing of chulun like chulun, truma like truma. You need to come onto a right. Elder Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that it's deraisa, kosher. How will he possibly explain why in the world, in this case, we don't say that the chulun is also? Zok Gemara, I'll tell you the answer. Very simple. Hamani Rabbanani. This brisa is going according to the Rabbana. V'ana da Amri. Let me turn over the daf. So let's get our bearings over here. This whole sugya started because we wanted to understand something that Rabbi Yosy said in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yosy said in the Mishnah that an androgynous could be Michael, his wife, for truma. On Rabbi Yosy, Rabbi Yochanan commented that not only can an androgynous feed his wife truma, he can feed a kachim as well, because Rabbi Yosy holds that an androgynous is a vadai zach. He's for sure a male. In Rabbi Yosy, Rabbi Yochanan said that there is no such thing as truma derabanan, truma b'zman deraisa. But that doesn't mean nobody argues on Rabbi Yosy. The brisa that we just quoted, the Namar Aleph, that says you could say chulun nafla, that's not going according to Rabbi Yosy. That's going according to the Rabbanan. So you're right. You do have proof that sometimes truma is derabanan. That's in Rabbi Yosy. That's in the Rabbanan. But Rabbi Yochanan, when he said that truma b'zman is deraisa, is going according to Rabbi Yosy, and we're going to prove it. We're going to prove it that Rabbi Yosy holds that truma b'zman is deraisa. The Tanya b'Seid Olam. There's a brisa in Seid Olam. It says in the pasuk, "V'aviacha Hashem alekecha el haaretz asher yarshu avisecha," to the land that your forefathers yarshined, v'irishta and yarshined. So there's two Yerushas here: Yarshu avisecha and v'irishta. So we learn Yerusha Rishona u'shniya yesh lahem. Even though when Yeshua took Klal Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael, they yarshined it, but when they were thrown out by the Golus Bavel, they lost their rights to Eretz Yisrael. So when Ezra Sefer took them back for the second Beis HaMikdash, he yarshined it for them again. But Shlishis Ein Lahem, there's no third Yerusha. You know why? Because they don't need a third Yerusha. Because even when we were thrown out by Titus, even when we had the Churban Bayis Sheni, Eretz Yisrael didn't lose its Kedusha. We retained the control of Eretz Yisrael, at least from a Kedusha perspective. And therefore there's no more Yerusha, which means the Kedusha Shniya Kitchel Olam, which by definition means that the Chiyuv of Mitzvos HaTluyos Baritz are still there. So therefore Truma B'zman Hazeh is Doiraisa. Rabbi Yochanan, how do we know this is Rabbi Yosy? Because Rabbi Yochanan said, Mantana Seder Olam Rabbi Yosy. So you see clearly that Rabbi Yosy has a special shita that Truma B'zman Hazeh is Doiraisa. So now let's get back to understanding the Brisa Namar Aleph. The Brisa Namar Aleph said, you assume that the Chulun fell into the Chulun and the Truma fell into the Truma. We learned that Rabbi Yochanan learns this is a Darbana and there's no Rav. So how does this magic work? Are you telling me that Rabbi Yochanan holds that by the Rabbanan you don't need a Rav? I'll prove to you that even when it's a Shaila of an Isra the Rabbanan, you still need a Rav. Because Vaknan we learned Mikvah sheyesh boy arba'am saw michuvamis. A mikvah who has the exact shear 40 saw. Nosan saw, you added a saw. And Rashi says, what did you add a saw of? Shar mashkinu meperesh v'temet sheichmetz. You put in some foreign liquid that's not kosher for a mikveh. And then, not also. So when you put in a saw, now there's 41 saw, but it's a mix. Now you took out a saw, which clearly contained some water. So now technically there's less than 40 saw of water. Kosher, it will be kosher. Well, Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Shila, Amar Abasi, and Rabbi Yehuda bar Shila said in the name of Abasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ad Ruboy only until Roiv, meaning you need to have Roiv good water. My love the Nishtaya Ruboy. And now you see that by Ad Rabbanon, you need Roiv. It just means that you couldn't have taken out Roiv. But let's take a step back for a second. You had a mikveh that exactly 40 saw. You added some other juice to it. And then you took out one. Now you have less than 40 saw. So how does that work? A, B is Rashi learns that what was it that you put in? Some foreign liquid, which would possibly mikveh midaraisa. So we're trying to make a raya that you need roy for a derbanon, but we're discussing according to Rashi, we're discussing something that passes the mikveh midaraisa. So how do you have a raya that you need roy midarabanon if we're talking about a deraisa here? So this kasha, Chaim, you asked a kasha this afternoon, but Tosfos asked it, and I didn't learn Tosfos clearly this afternoon, so I didn't have shot, but now I have shot. So let's look at Tosfos that's into the wide lines, 3 lines down. Not also and not also kosher. Kosher for Tosfos. They need the shiva derabanan. I would agree that mayim shu'ubim is derabanan. If you pour in plain water, kedama perek amarchas abayis, may peris mi psulin. But if you put in may peris, psulin midaraisa litpoel behen. They're possible midaraisa. So if that's the case, how does it work over here? So Tosfos has 2 pshatim. One Tosfos wanted to say that maybe you could. Tosfos actually has 3 pshatim, but I'm only going to focus on 2. One pshat he wanted to say is maybe inami atemet sheyesh b'mayim. Maybe the type of may perish we're talking about is temet, which has water in it. So that's why it's may perish, but it's really like water. But Tosfos has another geshmak pshat. The Yeshloimid of Tosfos, the parach mishum de kaposik v'tani adruboy. I'm sorry, that's not what I'm looking for. I apologize. I'm looking for the midaraisa kama bottle. When you put in the first saw of juice, it became bottle. Now it becomes water, but it still is like mayim shuvim. So therefore, it's bottle, but it's still an issue derbanan because it still retains its status of mayim shuvim. Rashi specifically says over here that we're talking about mayim shuvim. Because Rashi says on the second to the last skinny line, Alma Ablagav the Psul Shiva Derabanon Boy V'Kashus. So Rashi is very difficult because Rashi earlier said they were speaking about Meperis. Now he's talking about Shiva. So the Achronim speak about Rashi, and the Achronim tell us that Rashi says that when you pour Meperis in and it's bottled into the mikveh, it doesn't become like kosher or water. It becomes like mayim shuvim. So therefore, Rashi says, now that it's in there, it has a status of mayim shuvim, which is an iser derabanan. So even though it becomes bottle, it doesn't become so bottle that it's like kosher or water. It only becomes bottle like it's like mayim shuvim, and that's why the Gemara had a raya that for mayim shuvim you need to have a roiv of tahirin, but the Gemara slug up the raya because maybe that the lo nishkol. Or you can have another answer why you can't ask me a kasha from the case of mikvah to the case of chulin, because we're not dealing with bittul. The reason why in the case of the chulin falling into the chulin and the truma falling into the truma has nothing to do with right. It's a new chiddush. It's a new chiddush that by the Rabbanon you say that it worked out for the best. And that has nothing to do with right. So therefore, you can't ask me any kasha from a mikveh. By a mikveh, you couldn't possibly say that the same may peris that I put in, I took out. Because it's obvious the moment you pour may peris into the mikveh, it equalizes. If you take another bucket out, chances are that bucket is not exactly what you put in a moment before. Gewaltig. So now let's go on to the next line. Zog the Heilige Gemara. Tanan, we learned. This is a whole new, no, this is not a whole new sugya. This is another kasha on Rish Lakish. So remember, Rish Lakish learns that the Tana, Rabbi Yosy in our Mishnah holds that when it says an androgynous could feed his wife Truma, it's not because he's a Vadei Zachar, it's because he's a Suffolk Zachar, but it's only Truma D'Rabban. The problem is the Mishnah says androgynous noisei. Lichatchila, an androgynous could marry. If lichatchila, an androgynous could marry, doesn't that say he's a Vadei Zachar? Zok Gemara will forever Rish Lakish will say, Tami im nasa. It doesn't mean lichatchila is supposed to marry. If he married, misafik is kedushin to kedushin. Correct Gemara, how could you fetch that into the Mishnah? Van noisei katan. It says noisei. Zok Rish Lakish, I'll prove to you that when it says noisei, it doesn't really mean lichatchila. It means b'di'evet. Uletamech, my avol lo nisa. Right? What does the Mishnah say? Noisei, the androgynous is like a male, so he could marry, he could make kedushin and asuin, but lo nisa, he's not a female. So if a man gives him kedushin, he will not become mukadeshes and asur. So that means b'di'evet. Lo nisa means even b'di'evet, it's nothing. So therefore, elamai nisa, the evet. So therefore, noisei nami the evet. The same as the Sefer is saying, even with the evet, it's not a good nisuin. So too in the ratio means the evet. Zok the Gemara, Rish Lakish, that's not shot in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is saying for carrot. Amri loy noisei lechatchila mash. When it says that a androgynous could be noisei, that means even the lechatchila could be noisei. Abol loy nisa the evet nami. If the Tana considers this androgynous to be a male, so it is because of lakatza. The noisei is lechatchila because he's a male, and the loy nisa is b'di'evet because he's not a female. So therefore, the Mishnah clearly is mashma that the androgynous is a vadei zachar, which is inconsistent with Rish Lakish, and that's the way it is. We learned a brisa that we tried to fetch him with Rish Lakish. We got some pshatim in it, but it wasn't gishmak. And now our Mishnah also seems to indicate not like Rish Lakish. Now the Gemara is going to ask on Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara is going to want to prove that it is a thought. Because what did the Mishnah say? And then androgynous is noisei ve'ein nisa, which would indicate that it's vadei zachar. But then Rabbi Eliezer added, and when we learned the Mishnah, we didn't know what Rabbi Eliezer meant to add. But what did Rabbi Eliezer add? When we Ketani Seifa, Rabbi Eliezer Eimer, androgynous chayavin of skila kezachar. If a man makes bia and an androgynous, it's considered mishkav zachar. He's chayiv skila. Well, to be mechayiv somebody's skila, it's clear that it's 100% a zachar. You wouldn't give someone skila for being boil a suffix. It's a vadei zachar. But from the fact that Rabbi Eliezer said that it's a vadei zachar, michlal the Tanakama is safukim isafkule. Wouldn't that tell us that the Tanakama only holds it's a suffix zachar? Because the Tanakama wouldn't kill someone from mishkav zachar. So it's a raya against Rabbi Yochanan, who learned that the Tanakama hold that it's a vadei zachar. Zok the Gemara, no. Bein lamar sai according to the Tanakama, Rabbi Yosef. Bein lamar sai according to Rabbi Eliezer. Miv shut pshitalei that this androgynous has a status of a male. So what are they arguing about? Now, when someone is being bought on an androgynous, there's two places to make bia. There's in his backside, which is what typical mishkav zachar is, and then there's in his front side, which would be the makom bia for a woman. So the question is, when someone is bought an androgynous and he's chayiv misa for mishkav zachar, is that only if he's boil him in the place where normally mishkav zachar occurs, which is what Rabbi Yosy holds, or the other Rabbi Eliezer, that no matter where the bia occurs, it's considered mishkav zachar and then chayiv skila. The ma'atar v'chayavin lo skila b'shnei mekayimos. Rabbi Eliezer holds that both types of bias would be mechayiv the perpetrator skila. U'ma'atar v'kazachar. The other man holds only the bia of a zachar, but the b'akim the kavus it would not be mechayiv misa. So, and tomorrow we're going to get into the svaros of these two tanoim. I just want to mention an unbelievable Tosfos. Tosfos says androgynous noisei. Tosfos actually speaks out. The androgynous noisei. I'm at the second to the bottom line. The androgynous noisei mashma the chayiv lisa the mifked a period of So Tyson wants to learn that in the direction of the din of a zocher, it's so stark that he even has a mitzvah of pruruvu, and he has to get married. Okay, Baltic, we could stop here. This was a beautiful block Gemara. We'll stop here. I want to wish everybody a good tavach, a mazel tavach. We're getting close to Kabbalah Torah. We should have a beautiful week of Torah to lead up to Kabbalah Torah. And the Rav spoke today that Shavuos is a time where we're needing on Parnasa. So in the schos of our Amelis B'Torah that we'll have this week, we should be zoichet to all the brachas that come with Shavuos.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach, I get the vach.
Good tavach.
Shkoyach Yosy.
Shkoyach Akiva. We have to get together.